The Galactic Council chamber sat at the very top of Station Verith Prime, a massive ring of metal and glass floating in the empty space between three star systems. The chamber was round and wide, with rows of seats rising up like the inside of a bowl. The ceiling was covered in crystals that changed color depending on the mood of the room. Most days they glowed a calm blue or a soft gold. On the day the humans came for their fifth review, the crystals were a lazy, peaceful yellow. Ambassador Lena Calloway walked into the chamber with her hands behind her back and a polite smile on her face. She was not a tall woman. In fact, compared to most of the alien delegates in the room, she was quite small. The Dravenki, who were insect-like beings that stood over 2 meters tall, made her look like a child standing next to a door frame. But Lena did not seem to care about her size. She walked with the calm, easy steps of someone who had been in this room many times before and was not worried about what would happen next. Behind her walked Commander Kyle Beckett. He was taller than Lena, with wide shoulders, a short beard, and eyes that never stopped moving. He looked at every corner of the room. He noted every door, every staircase, every delegate who shifted in their seat. He did this quietly, without turning his head too much, and no one in the room noticed he was doing it. That was the point. The High Speaker of the Dravenki, a large insectoid named Vorith Cell, stood at the central podium and clicked his jaw parts together. His species talked using a mix of sounds and chemical signals, but the translation system in the chamber turned everything into words that all species could understand. Humanity has now been a temporary member of the Galactic Council for 5 standard years, Vorith Cell said. His large compound eyes moved across the room slowly. During this time, they have followed all trade rules, respected all borders, and helped with 3 joint science missions. The review committee has prepared a report on their progress. Lena nodded. She had heard this kind of speech before. Every year, the council looked at humanity and tried to figure out where they fit. The council had a system for sorting species. They looked at teeth, claws, body size, speed, and natural weapons. Then they placed each species on a scale from harmless plant eater to dangerous predator. Humans had always confused them. They had small teeth, no claws, average speed, and no venom. On paper, they looked like a mid-level species that should not be very important. But the numbers never matched what humans actually did. The Velesi delegate, an amphibian named Coordinator Dren, leaned forward and tapped her desk. A glowing display appeared in the air above the chamber floor, showing a spinning image of Earth. If I may speak, Dren said in her soft, watery voice, the committee has noticed some things that do not add up. Your species shows all the social behaviors of a peaceful, group-living creature. You form families. You make art. You grieve when someone dies. You celebrate holidays. All of this is normal for a species that eats plants or sometimes eats meat. A low-level omnivore, as we classify it. She paused. The room grew quiet. But, she continued, your military record from the border conflict with the Red Honey 3 years ago does not match that classification. Not at all. Lena kept her face calm. Kyle stood very still beside her. The Red Honey are a level 4 predator species, Dren said. They have taken over 11 star systems by force. Their soldiers are some of the best fighters in this part of the galaxy. And your people defeated their forward fleet and forced them to stop fighting in less than 40 hours. We would like to understand how that happened. The crystals on the ceiling shifted from yellow to a pale, nervous gray. Kyle looked at Lena. She gave a tiny shake of her head, so small that only he could see it. We used standard defense methods, Lena said in a steady voice. Our fleet moved to meet the threat, set up a line of defense, and opened a channel for talking. The Red Honey decided to stop fighting. Vorith Cell clicked his jaw slowly. Ambassador Calloway, the Red Honey did not decide to stop fighting. Our intelligence reports say that they tried to pull back, but they could not, because your ships had already surrounded them on every side within 6 hours of the first contact. 6 hours. The Red Honey need 9 hours to bring their full fleet together. Your people were already in position before theirs could even organize. How? Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she gave a small smile. We had good information, she said. The crystals turned a deep, dark purple. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Vorith Cell stared at her with his many-lensed eyes for a long time. Then he looked down at his notes and moved to the next item on the agenda. The moment passed, but the feeling in the room did not. Something had changed. The council had been watching humanity for 5 years, and for 5 years, the answers they got were polite, vague, and somehow always incomplete. The session ended an hour later with the usual formal statements and the usual polite goodbyes. Lena shook hands with 3 delegates and exchanged nods with 5 more. She smiled the entire time. Kyle stood behind her and said nothing, which was exactly what he was supposed to do. Later that evening, Kyle and Lena walked together through a long glass hallway that connected the council building to the section of the station where the human diplomats lived. The hallway was transparent on all sides, and through the glass they could see the stars stretching out in every direction. A large cargo ship floated past slowly, its red and white lights blinking in the dark. "They are getting closer to the real questions," Kyle said. His voice was low, just loud enough for Lena to hear. "They always get closer," Lena said. "Every year they push a little harder. And every year they back off because the answers scare them. What happens when they stop backing off?" Lena stopped walking. She turned and looked out through the glass at the stars. Her reflection looked back at her, small and sharp against the endless black. "Then we tell them the truth," she said quietly. "All of it. And we hope that when they hear it, they see us as allies and not as something to be afraid of." Kyle stood beside her and looked out at the same stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the borders of council space, things moved in the dark. Things that did not follow rules or sign treaties or attend review sessions. Things that the council had not yet met, but that humanity had been fighting since before they had names for the stars. "And if they are afraid?" Kyle asked. Lena did not answer right away. She watched a small shuttle detach from the cargo ship and glide toward the station, its lights leaving tiny trails against the darkness. "Then we protect them anyway," she said. "That is what we do." Kyle nodded. He did not need to say anything else. They had both been in service long enough to know that protection was not always understood by the ones being protected. Sometimes the shield looked just as frightening as the sword. They walked the rest of the hallway in silence, 2 small figures moving through a tunnel of glass and stars, carrying a truth that the galaxy was not ready to hear. But it would hear it soon. Whether it was ready or not. 3 days after the review session, everything changed. A distress signal came in from the Ketha expanse, a wide and mostly empty stretch of space near the outer edge of council territory. A mining colony on a small moon called Valera 6 had gone completely silent. No communications, no routine check-ins, nothing. The last message from the colony was broken and full of static, but the translation system had pulled out 4 words from the Feldrathi language: teeth, dark, many, and end. The Feldrathi were one of the gentlest species in the galaxy. They were soft-skinned, plant-eating beings who spent their lives pulling valuable minerals out of rocks on moons and asteroids. They had no army, no warships, and no enemies that anyone knew about. They were the kind of species that every other species felt protective of, the kind that made the galaxy feel a little softer just by existing. And now an entire colony of them had gone quiet. The council called an emergency meeting. Vorith Sel stood at his podium, his jaw parts clicking in a fast, nervous rhythm that his translator did not bother to convert into words. "We have lost all contact with Valera 6, he said. "A small drone was sent to scan the surface 12 hours ago. It came back with images showing heavy damage to the colony buildings, some kind of biological contamination on the ground, and no signs of life anywhere." The room filled with low, worried sounds. Every species had its own way of expressing fear, and for a moment, the chamber sounded like a forest at night. The crystals on the ceiling flickered between gray and a dull, angry red. Coordinator Dren raised her thin hand. "What do you mean by biological contamination?" "We do not know," Vorith Sel admitted. "The drone was not built for that kind of detailed scan. We need to send a team to the surface to find out what happened." The room went very, very quiet. Nobody volunteered. The Dravenki were strong, but they were careful and slow to act. The Velesi were scientists who studied things from a safe distance. The Torati were fierce lizard-like warriors, but their delegate at the meeting was too junior to make that kind of decision on his own. One by one, every species in the room found a reason to stay in their seat. Then Lena Calloway stood up. "The Terran Collective will send a response team," she said. Her voice was calm and even, as if she were offering to help carry groceries instead of volunteering to walk into a dead colony where something terrible had happened. Vorith Sel turned all of his eyes toward her. "Ambassador, are you sure about this? We have no idea what the threat is." "That is exactly why we should go," Lena replied. My people train for situations where nothing is known and everything could be dangerous. This is what we do. The crystals shifted to a pale, uneasy blue. Several delegates exchanged glances. The humans had volunteered instantly, without hesitation, without even a moment of discussion among themselves. The speed of it was almost as unsettling as the silence from Valera 6. The Terran Rapid Response ship Hawthorne reached Valera 6 18 hours later. It was a medium-sized military vessel with a crew of 42 people, painted in flat gray that made it nearly invisible against the darkness of space. It was not the biggest ship in the Terran fleet, and it was not the most heavily armed. But it was fast, tough, and crewed by people who had been chosen specifically because they did not panic easily. Commander Kyle Beckett picked 12 people for the ground team. Every single one of them had volunteered. Every single one of them had been on missions that were never talked about in public. These were the kind of soldiers who kept their medals in drawers and their nightmares to themselves. Lieutenant Mara Ashby was among them. She was the team's combat medic, a woman with calm brown eyes and hands that never shook, not even when everything around her was falling apart. She had saved lives in places where saving lives was supposed to be impossible, and she had a quiet way of looking at bad situations that made other people believe they might actually survive. Sergeant Dominic Hale was also on the team. He was the explosives expert, a tall man with a soft voice who could take apart a building or put one back together depending on what the mission required. He carried enough equipment on his back to make a very large hole in almost anything, and he did it with the relaxed attitude of someone carrying a bag of groceries. They suited up in the ship's armory, pulling on their black tactical armor. The council had once filed an official comment about this armor, noting that it was, in their words, unnecessarily scary looking. Kyle had read the comment, thought about it for about 2 seconds, and moved on. "Comms check," he said, his voice flat and all business. Each team member reported in, one after another. All systems working. All signals clear. Rules for this mission, Kyle continued. We do not know what is down there. Stay close together. Stay quiet. Do not shoot unless I tell you to or unless something is about to kill you. If you find anyone alive, protect them first. If you find something hostile, mark its location and come back to me. We go in together, we come out together. Clear. 12 voices said clear at the same time. Mara attached her medical bag to her belt and checked her supplies one more time. What if nobody is alive down there? She asked. Kyle looked at her. His face was calm, but his eyes were not. There was something in them that Mara had seen before, a kind of cold focus that meant he had already prepared himself for the worst and was now thinking 3 steps past it. Then we find out what killed them, he said, and we make very sure it does not get the chance to do it again. The shuttle dropped down through Valera 6's thin atmosphere and landed on the colony's main pad. The surface of the moon was gray and flat, covered in craters from years of mining. The colony was a group of dome-shaped buildings connected by long, covered walkways. From the air, several of the domes looked broken open, like eggs cracked from the inside. Kyle stepped off the shuttle first. The air was thin and cold, with a strange chemical smell that he could not place. It was not the smell of any machine or any gas he recognized. It was something organic, something alive, and that made it worse. He signaled the team to spread out in their standard search pattern. They moved into the first walkway without speaking. The walls had deep scratches running along them, long grooves cut into the metal as if something heavy and sharp had been dragged across the surface. The lights were all dead. The only light came from the lamps built into their helmets, and the white beams cut through the dusty air like knives. Dominic stopped beside one of the scratched walls and ran his fingers over the marks. He was quiet for a moment, studying the depth and the angle of the cuts. These were not made by a machine, he said softly. Something alive did this. Something big and something strong. Kyle nodded once. Keep moving. They found the first body in the second dome. It was a Feldrothy miner, curled up against the far wall with their arms raised, as if they had been trying to push something away. The body was not torn or cut. It was whole, but it looked wrong. The skin was thin and dry, like old paper, and the color was all gone from it. At the base of the neck, there was a single small wound, round and neat, as if made by a needle. Mara knelt down beside the body and passed her scanner over the wound. She stared at the readings for a long moment, and when she looked up, her face was tight. This was not a weapon, she said. Something used enzymes to break down all the fluids inside the body, and then it drained everything out through this wound. This was not an attack. This was feeding. The team went very still. Kyle felt something shift inside his chest, a cold, heavy feeling that settled in behind his ribs and stayed there. He knew this feeling. Every human knew it, even if they did not have a name for it. It was the feeling that came when you saw something so wrong, so deeply unfair, that every part of you refused to accept it. The Feldrathi had been hunted. Not fought. Not attacked in a war. Hunted and fed on, like animals. Kyle looked at his team. He saw the same feeling in every one of their faces. Not panic. Not fear. Something colder. Something older. Something that had been part of human beings since before they had language or fire or tools. "Mark this spot," he said quietly. "We keep going." They moved deeper into the colony, and the darkness seemed to grow thicker around them, as if it knew they were coming and was waiting to see what they would do. Back on the Hawthorne, 3 alien observers sat in the ship's command center watching the live feeds from the ground team's helmet cameras. The council had insisted on sending them along, 2 HFY scientists and 1 Dravenki military officer named Kes Voren. Kes had not been worried when the mission started. He had read the file on humans before leaving. He had noted their average strength, their average speed, their small teeth and flat nails. He had looked at their bodies and seen nothing that would scare a trained soldier from any real predator species. He had expected to watch the humans walk through the colony, take some readings, and come back to the ship within a few hours. He was now gripping the edges of his desk with all 4 of his hands, and he could not look away from the screens. The helmet cameras showed Kyle's team moving through the destroyed colony in almost total darkness. They were not using much light, just the small lamps on their helmets, and they moved in a pattern that Kes had never seen before. It was not like any military formation in the Council's training manuals. It was loose and flowing, with each person shifting their position based on what the others were doing, like water moving around rocks in a stream. No one gave orders for these movements. No one spoke at all. They just knew where to go. One of the HFY scientists, a nervous female named Tura, was staring at the biometric readings that the human suits were sending back to the ship. "This does not make sense," she whispered. "Their stress hormones are going up. They are clearly afraid. But their heart rates are going down. That is the opposite of what should happen. When a creature is afraid, its heart should beat faster, not slower." "They are not panicking," Kes said. His voice was tight. "They are concentrating." "On what?" Tura asked. Kes did not answer. He watched as Kyle raised one closed fist, and every single person on the team stopped moving at exactly the same instant. Not one person first and then the others. All of them, at the same time, as if they shared one brain. Kyle tilted his head to one side, listening. Then he pointed 2 fingers to the left. 3 team members moved left without a word. He pointed to the right. 2 more went that way. The rest tightened their formation around him and kept going forward. "How?" the second HFY scientist said, flipping through audio channels on his console. "How are they talking to each other?" "There is no sound. There is no radio signal. There is no electronic communication of any kind. How do they all know what to do?" Kes thought about this. In his military training, he had studied the hunting methods of the galaxy's top predator species. The Rethani used bursts of chemicals to send messages during combat. The Charik used sounds too low for most species to hear. Every apex predator had some way of coordinating when they hunted together. Humans, Kes realized, did it with their faces and their bodies. A look, a nod, the way someone turned their shoulders or shifted their weight. Thousands and thousands of years of hunting together had taught them to read each other so well that they did not need words or signals or technology. They just looked at each other and knew. And the most frightening part was that this skill could not be detected or blocked by any technology in the galaxy. There was nothing to intercept, nothing to jam, nothing to decode. It was written into their muscles and their eyes. On the ground, Kyle's team entered the colony's central processing building. It was a large round room filled with mining machines and storage boxes. The lights overhead were all smashed. In the middle of the room, piled in a rough heap, were more Feldrathi bodies. Many more. Mara's voice came through the feed, tight and controlled. 47 bodies. Same wounds as before. They were brought here. Something gathered them together in one place and fed on all of them. Dominic moved to the far wall and pointed his light toward the ceiling. The beam traveled upward and found something attached to the ceiling. Something large. Something that was moving. Contact, Dominic said, and his voice was as calm as if he were saying the weather was nice. The thing let go of the ceiling and dropped to the floor with a heavy, wet sound. It was about 4 meters long, with a body made of segments, like a centipede, but much bigger and much worse. Its skin was see-through, and underneath, the team could see the stolen fluids of the Feldrothy glowing softly inside it. It had no eyes at all. Its head was a flat wedge shape covered with rows and rows of thin, needle-like tubes that could pierce skin and drain a body dry. It hit the floor and screamed. The scream was high and layered, built from several sounds at once, and it was designed by evolution to make other creatures freeze in terror and run. It was a predator's call, the kind of sound that went straight past the thinking brain and hit the oldest, most basic survival instincts. On the Hawthorne, both HFY scientists jerked backward in their seats. Tura knocked a data tablet off the desk with her elbow. Kes felt his own body try to run, a deep pull in his legs and his gut that told him to get away, get small, get hidden. It took all of his training to stay in his chair. On the helmet feeds, the humans did not move. Not one of them flinched. Not one of them stepped back. Their heart rates, which had been slowly dropping as they moved through the colony, stayed exactly where they were. Kyle stepped forward. Toward the creature. Toward the screaming. "Light it up," he said. The team fired together with a timing that Kes would later call mechanical in his report, but he knew that was not the right word. Machines did what they were programmed to do. These humans did what they chose to do. They aimed for the joints first, the places where the body segments connected, to stop the thing from moving. Then they focused their fire on the head. The creature thrashed and screamed louder. And then 2 more dropped from the ceiling behind the team. Dominic turned around, pulled an explosive charge from his belt, placed it on the floor, stepped back exactly the right number of paces, and set it off. The blast sent one creature flying into the wall so hard that it cracked the metal panels. The second creature came straight at Mara. She sidestepped it. She did not jump or dive or scramble. She simply moved her body to one side with the smooth, controlled motion of someone who had practiced this movement so many times that it was as natural as breathing. As the creature passed her, she pulled a blade from her belt and drove it into the joint where the head connected to the first body segment. The creature hit the ground and did not get up. The whole fight took 90 seconds. When it was over, 3 dead creatures lay on the floor. 12 humans stood around them. Nobody was seriously hurt. One team member had a small cut on his forearm where a tendril had gotten through a gap in his armor. Mara cleaned and bandaged it in under a minute. On the Hawthorne, Kes Vorin realized that he was standing. He did not remember getting up from his chair. The 2 HFY scientists were sitting very close together, holding each other's arms, their wide amphibian eyes locked on the screens. Tura's voice was barely a whisper. "What are they?" she said, and Kes could not tell if she was asking about the dead creatures on the floor or the 12 humans standing over them. He looked at the biometric data one more time. The human stress hormones were high. Their adrenaline was flooding their bodies. Every chemical signal said that these people were terrified. But their movements were smooth, their aim was perfect, and their decisions were fast and correct. They felt the fear. They felt all of it. And they had walked toward the screaming anyway. Kes sat back down slowly and began writing his report. He did not know yet what words he would use, but he knew that nothing in the Council's files about humanity was correct. Not even close, every other species would have left. The Council's rules were clear about situations like this. When a team confirmed a dangerous unknown threat, the correct thing to do was pull back, set up a safe zone around the area, write a full report, and wait for a proper military fleet to arrive. That process usually took between 2 and 6 weeks. Kyle did not pull back. He looked at the 3 dead creatures on the floor, and he looked at the 47 Feldrothy bodies piled in the center of the room, and something settled into his face that Mara knew well. It was not anger, exactly. It was quieter than anger. It was the look of a man who had made a decision somewhere deep inside himself and was not going to change his mind, no matter what happened next. "We clear the whole colony," he said. "Every building, every tunnel, every air duct. Nothing that did this leaves this moon alive." Nobody argued. Nobody asked if he was sure. Nobody suggested they wait for backup. The team checked their weapons, reloaded their ammunition, and formed up. For the next 9 hours, Kyle's 12-person team moved through every part of Valera 6 colony. They went through the living quarters, the storage rooms, the mining tunnels, the equipment sheds, and the maintenance passages that ran like veins through the walls. They found 17 more creatures, some as small as 2 meters, some as large as 6. They killed every single one. The helmet camera feeds were being sent back to the Hawthorne, and from there, to the council chamber on Verith Prime. What had started as a simple monitoring task had turned into something that more and more delegates came to watch. Word spread through the station. By the 3rd hour, the viewing gallery was full. By the 6th hour, delegates who had not attended a council session in years were standing in the aisles. They watched the humans hunt. That was the only word for it. The humans were not just walking through the colony and reacting when they found a creature. They were tracking them. They used sound, heat sensors, and something Kyle called gut feeling, which the translators could not properly convert because no other species had a matching concept. They figured out where the creatures would go before the creatures went there. They set traps, blocked escape routes, and drove the creatures into open spaces where the team had clear shots. It was not defense. It was not containment. It was a hunt, carried out with a cold, patient efficiency that made every predator species in the council chamber feel deeply uncomfortable. At one point during the sweep, Mara and 2 team members were checking a narrow storage tunnel when a creature burst through a weak wall panel right behind her. It came fast, faster than anything that size should have been able to move in a tight space. Mara did not scream. She did not freeze. She dropped to one knee, rolled forward along the floor, came up facing the creature, and fired 3 shots into its head before it could finish its leap. The whole thing took less than 2 seconds. In the council chamber, Vorith Cell turned to Coordinator Dren. "Your scientists told us they were low-level omnivores," he said. Dren's skin had gone very pale. "Our models did not account for this." "Your models were wrong," Vorith Cell said. "These are not plant-eaters who are defending themselves. These are top-level predators who have been pretending to be harmless." Dren shook her head slowly. "No, that is not right either. Look at their body data." She pulled up the live biometric feed on the main display screen. Heart rates, stress chemicals, adrenaline levels, brain activity. The numbers painted a picture that no words could capture. "Their stress hormones are very high," Dren explained. "Their bodies are flooded with fear chemicals. But look at their brain activity. The front part of their brains, the part that handles planning and decision-making, is more active than we have ever recorded in any species. They are not running on instinct. They are making careful, thought-out choices while their bodies are screaming at them to run away." The room was completely silent. "Every predator species we know about handles fear in one of 2 ways," Dren continued, her voice soft and a little shaky. "The Rethani use chemicals in their own brains to turn fear off. The Charik simply do not feel it at all. Humans are different. They feel the fear completely. Every part of it. Their hearts pound, their muscles tighten, their breathing changes. And then, with full knowledge of how afraid they are, they choose to keep going. That is not instinct. That is will." Deep inside the colony, Kyle's team reached the last section they had not yet searched, a mining shaft that went straight down into the moon, more than 100 meters deep. The shaft was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for 2 people to stand side by side. The chemical smell that had been present since they arrived was much stronger here, thick and sour and almost enough to make their eyes water. Kyle stopped at the top of the shaft and looked back at his team. His face was caught clearly on the helmet feed. His jaw was tight. His eyes were hard. But there was something else in his expression too, something that every human watching the feed recognized immediately. Rage. Not the loud, wild kind. The quiet kind. The kind that came from seeing innocent people who could not defend themselves treated like food. The kind that did not burn hot and fast but settled into the bones like cold metal and stayed there until the job was finished. "One more nest," Kyle said. "We end this." They went down into the dark. The shaft opened up at the bottom into a wide natural cave that the miners had broken into years before. The creatures had turned it into a nesting place. The walls were covered with egg cases, hundreds of them, each one see-through and glowing faintly with stolen fluid. And in the center of the cave, bigger than any creature they had seen so far, was the matriarch. She was 8 meters long, swollen with nutrients taken from the dead, her feeding tendrils waving slowly in the stale air. She screamed when they came in. The sound bounced off the cave walls and hit the team from every direction at once. This time, the sound worked. 2 team members stumbled. One dropped to a knee. Kyle felt his vision go blurry and his balance tilt sideways as the sound attacked his inner ear. He kept walking forward. "Dominic," he said through gritted teeth. "The eggs." "On it," Dominic replied, already moving along the wall, placing incendiary charges at even intervals. The matriarch charged. She was faster than the smaller creatures and much stronger. Her body slammed into the group like a truck, throwing 3 people off their feet. Kyle was launched sideways into the cave wall. He felt ribs crack. He felt the pain flash through his entire body like electricity. He got back up and started shooting. The team came together around him. Mara grabbed one of the fallen team members, dragged them to cover behind a rock, checked that they were alive, and then turned and fired her sidearm into the matriarch's side until the magazine was empty. Dominic finished setting the last charge. 30 seconds, he called out. "Everyone move. Now." They moved. Not in a panic. In order. The people who could walk carried the people who could not. The guns never stopped firing. Kyle was the last one to leave the cave, walking backward, his rifle pointed at the matriarch as she screamed and threw herself toward them. The charges went off with a deep boom that shook the ground under their feet. The cave collapsed. The matriarch, the eggs, the nest, everything was buried under 100 meters of solid rock. Kyle stood at the top of the shaft, breathing hard, holding his broken ribs with one hand. His team gathered around him. 12 went down. 12 came back up. On the Hawthorne, Kes Voren was on his feet. He did not remember standing. The HFY scientists were holding on to each other and shaking. In the council chamber, 300 delegates sat in total silence. The crystals on the ceiling had gone completely dark. Not a color. Not even gray. Just dark, as if the room itself was at a loss for what to feel. 3 days after the mission on Valera 6, Lena Calloway stood before the full Galactic Council. She had barely slept since the rescue team came back. None of them had. Kyle was in the medical bay on the Hawthorne with 3 cracked ribs and a hairline fracture in his left wrist. Mara had stayed beside him for most of that time, partly because she was his medic and partly because neither of them wanted to be alone with what they had seen. Dominic had cleaned and rechecked every piece of his equipment twice, which was what he always did after a bad mission, a quiet ritual that helped him put the world back in order. The council chamber was completely full. Every seat was taken. Species that had not bothered to show up for years had sent delegates. Some had come because they wanted answers. Some had come because they had watched the helmet feeds and could not stop thinking about what they had seen. The crystals overhead were a flat, waiting gray. Vorith Cell opened the session. "Ambassador Calloway, the council has reviewed all recordings and reports from Valera 6. We have many questions." "I know you do," Lena said. "And I believe it is time you received honest answers." She took a slow breath and looked out across the rows of alien faces, some with eyes, some with sensory organs she could not name, all of them watching her with an intensity that pressed against her like heat from an open flame. "For 5 years," she began, "you have been trying to figure out what humans are. You have looked at our bodies and found nothing special. Our teeth are small. Our claws do not exist. We cannot see in the dark. We are not particularly fast or strong. By every physical measurement your scientists use, we are a perfectly average species. Perhaps even below average." She paused and let that sit for a moment. "And that has confused you," she continued, "because what we do does not match what we look like. We should not have been able to stop the Red Hani fleet in 40 hours. We should not have been able to clear an infested colony with 12 people. By your models, we should be a small, struggling species barely holding on to a few colony worlds near our home star. But we are not. And the reason we are not has nothing to do with our bodies. It has to do with a choice we made a very long time ago." The chamber was so still that Lena could hear the faint hum of the station's life support systems. "On our home planet," she said, "we were never the top animal. We could not outrun the things that chased us. We could not outfight them with our bare hands. We could not fly away or swim to safety or hide underground. We had no armor, no poison, no special sense that warned us of danger. What we had was each other. We learned to work together. We learned to make plans. We learned to build tools. We learned to talk and to teach and to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. But we also learned something else. Something that I think might be the most important thing about us." She looked directly at Vorith Cell. We learn to be afraid and to act anyway. The words hung in the air like a held breath. Every species feels fear, Lena said. It is a survival tool. It tells you to run, to hide, to make yourself small. And for most species, that is exactly what happens. The fear comes, and the body obeys it. But humans learned, over millions of years of being hunted by things bigger and faster and stronger than us, to do something different with fear. We learned to feel it completely, to let it fill our minds and our bodies, and then to use it. Fear makes our senses sharper. It makes our thinking faster. It floods our muscles with energy. And instead of running from the thing that scares us, we turn around and face it. Not because we are too stupid to be afraid. Not because our brains are wired wrong. Because somewhere deep inside us, in a place that is older than language and older than thought, there is a voice that says, if I do not fight this thing, it will hurt the people behind me. She looked around the chamber. You asked how we stopped the red honey. When our sensors detected their fleet heading toward our border colonies, every single person in our defense force volunteered to go. Not because they were ordered to. Not because they did not understand what might happen to them. Because there were families on those colonies. There were children. There were people who could not protect themselves. And when a human sees someone helpless being threatened by something powerful, something changes inside us. Your classified reports call it predator mode. She let that phrase fill the room for a moment. I have read those reports. Your scientists describe it as a primitive combat response, a leftover from our early evolution. With respect, that description misses the point. It is not primitive. It is the most advanced ability we have. It is the power to feel terror, to understand it completely, and then to choose to fight anyway, not for ourselves, but for someone else. She stepped back from the podium for a moment and let the silence hold. 47 Feldrothi miners died on Valera 6, she said, and her voice was quieter now. 47 peaceful, kind people who spent their lives doing honest work and sending the results home to their families. When my team saw their bodies, something happened to them. Not panic. Not rage, though that came too. Something deeper. Something that said, this is wrong, and I will not allow it to continue. Not on my watch. Not while I am still standing. Kyle Beckett went down into that mine shaft with broken ribs because he could not walk away from a nest full of the things that had killed those miners. Mara Ashby fought a creature twice her size with a sidearm and a knife because it was between her and a fallen teammate. Dominic Hale placed explosive charges in a cave full of monsters and calmly counted down from 30 because someone had to, and he was the one with the skills to do it. They were all afraid. Every single one of them. Their biometric data proves it. Their bodies were screaming at them to run. And they did not run. They did not run because they had decided that the people who died in that colony deserved justice, and the people who might die next on some other moon deserved protection, and they were willing to pay for that with their own lives if they had to. She straightened her back and met the gaze of every delegate she could see. You want to know what humans are? I will tell you. We are the species that runs toward the thing that everything else runs away from. We are the ones who will break our own bones to carry a stranger to safety. We are the ones who invented the idea of sacrifice, not because we do not love our own lives, but because we have decided that there are things more important than survival. We are not the monsters you should worry about. We are the ones who fight the monsters. And if this council will have us, we will fight them for you too. For as long as it takes. For as far as we need to go. Because that is who we are. That is what we have always been. The chamber stayed silent for a long time. The crystals on the ceiling remained dark, as if the room was still trying to understand what it had just heard. Then, slowly, one by one, the crystals began to change. They did not turn gold or blue or any of the usual colors. They shifted to something the station's records had not shown in over 200 years. A deep, steady, clear white. According to the old records, white was the color the crystals made when they sensed something the original builders of the chamber had designed them to recognize but had never truly expected to see. Respect. Vorith Sel stood up from his seat. He looked at Lena for a long time. Then he did something that no Dravenki High Speaker had done for any outsider in living memory. He lowered his great head, showing the soft joint at the back of his skull. Among the Dravenki, this was the deepest sign of trust one being could offer another. It meant, I believe you will not hurt me. I believe you will protect me. I give you my most vulnerable place. The review of humanity's provisional membership is concluded, he said. The provisional status is hereby removed. Lena felt her heart stop for a moment. Effective immediately, Vorith Cell continued, the Terran Collective is granted full and permanent membership in the Galactic Council, with all rights, all responsibilities, and all protections that come with it. The chamber broke open with sound. Delegates stood. The crystals blazed white. Coordinator Dren was making a sound that Lena's translator could not turn into words but that sounded very much like someone crying from happiness. Lena stood at the podium with her hands shaking slightly and let herself breathe. On the Hawthorne, Kyle watched the broadcast from his bed in the medical bay. His ribs were wrapped in healing bandages and his wrist was held still in a compression brace. Mara sat in the chair next to him with her boots off and her feet resting on a supply crate. Dominic leaned in the doorway, eating a protein bar with the careful, slow bites of a man who was trying very hard not to show that he was crying. "Did she just get us full membership?" Mara asked. Kyle nodded slowly. "Yeah. She did." Mara stared at the ceiling. All it took was killing a bunch of alien centipedes and making a speech about feelings. Kyle started to laugh and then stopped with a sharp breath, pressing his hand against his ribs. "Please do not make me laugh. Everything hurts." "Good," Mara said with a grin. "That means you are still alive." Dominic finished his protein bar, folded the wrapper into a small square, and put it in his pocket. "So what do we do now?" he asked. Kyle turned his head and looked out the small window at the stars. Somewhere out there, 47 Feldrothi miners were being brought home by a council recovery team. Somewhere out there, the planet where those creatures came from was still waiting to be found. Somewhere out there, on moons and stations and quiet little colonies scattered across the galaxy, peaceful people were going about their lives, not knowing about the things that move through the dark between the stars. "Now," Kyle said, "we go find the next fight." Mara put her boots back on. Dominic checked his weapon. The Hawthorne turned its nose toward the dark, and the humans went hunting.